Hey, this is Noggs and welcome to Noggs House. Today we're talking about the Great Migration, and I'm not talking about birds flying south for the winter. This is the incredible story of how life moved from water onto land. It's a journey that involved developing bones, lungs, and the ability to walk. This wasn't just one event. It was a long, complex process that completely changed biology. Let's dive in. Our story starts about 390 million years ago during a time period called the Late Devonian. Back then, Earth looked very different. There were lots of shallow waters, and many of these watery environments were oxygen poor. They didn't have much oxygen dissolved in them. In these waters lived a special group of fish called lobe-finned fish. Lobe-finned means their fins had fleshy muscular lobes instead of just being thin and flat. These lobe-finned fish started developing adaptations for life on land. Adaptations are changes that help an organism survive in its environment. These pioneering fish were the ancestors of tetrapods. That's the group that includes amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals like us. This period marks the beginning of a transformation that would fundamentally change life on Earth and lead to all the amazing biodiversity we see today. One of the biggest challenges for moving to land was gravity. In water, buoyancy helps hold you up. You feel lighter and can float. But on land, gravity pulls you down hard. This meant animals needed major skeletal changes to their bones. The ancestral fish had paired fins supported by simple rod-like structures. But over about 30 million years, these fins gradually transformed into the complex limbs of land animals. This evolution gave these animals the structural integrity they needed to support their own weight and move around on land. Without strong bones, they had just collapsed in a heap. The fossil record, the collection of fossils that shows us ancient life, reveals how this transformation happened step by step. Early aquatic creatures show us transitional innovations, features that are in between fish and land animals. The bones inside their fins begin to look like the basic pattern of tetrapod limbs. They had structures that were homologous. Homologous means similar to structure and from the same evolutionary origin to bones we have, like the humerus, your upper arm bone, the forearm bones, and even a primitive wrist. The humerus evolved from being short and stubby in fish to being more elongated, robust, and twisted in early tetrapods. This was super important for supporting weight and absorbing stress when walking. Another crucial change happened in the vertebral column, your backbone or spine. It evolved to allow increased neck mobility. This was essential because land animals need to look around at their surroundings. Fish have their heads directly attached to their shoulders and can't turn their heads, but land animals need that flexibility. In 2004, scientists made an amazing discovery. They found a fossil of Tiktaalik rosea, dating back about 375 million years ago. Tiktaalik is often called a fishapod because it's right in between a fish and a tetrapod. It still had fish characteristics like scales, fin rays, and gills, but it also had significant tetrapod-like adaptations. It had a flattened crocodile-like head, it had a distinct neck that allowed its head to move independently from its body, and it had sturdy internal fin bones, including a primitive wrist joint. These features suggest that Tiktaalik could prop itself up in shallow water and use its limb-like fins for support. It probably couldn't walk far on land, but it could do some limited movement outside the water. This makes Tiktaalik a crucial transitional fossil. It shows us evolution in action. A bit later, around 365 to 370 million years ago, we get our first animals with recognizable limbs and digits. Digits are fingers and toes. Ankylostegia gunnari lived about 365 million years ago and is one of the earliest stem tetrapods. It had actual limbs with 8 digits per limb. But here's the interesting part. Even though Ankylostegia had limbs, it was still primarily aquatic. It kept its internal gills and had a lateral line, a sensory organ that fish use to detect movement in water. Its paddle-like limbs weren't really suited for bearing weight on land. Scientists think it used them for maneuvering underwater, like pushing through plants and navigating shallow waters. Another early tetrapod, Iphiostega, lived about 370 million years ago. It was a broadly built animal that could grow to 4.9 feet long, almost 5 foot. It had more robust bony legs, arms, and digits, along with a strong rib cage for support. While it was better adapted for supporting its weight than Ankylostegia, its limbs were still primarily best for navigating shallow, swampy waters and clambering over plants, not for walking long distances on land. These fossils teach us something important. Limbs and digits evolved before animals were fully committed to living on land. The limbs first evolved for other purposes, then got adapted for walking later. Moving to land also required the ability to breathe air. Fish use gills to get oxygen from water, but gills don't work well in air. They collapse and dry out. The evolution of lungs was another critical adaptation. Interestingly, lungs evolved very early in bony fish lineages. even before ray-finned fish and lobe-finned fish split into separate groups. This suggests that lungs originally gave fish an advantage in oxygen-poor aquatic environments by letting them gulp air at the surface. These primitive lungs were probably simple air-breathing organs. Over time, some fish lineages kept evolving these organs into true lungs, while other fish evolved them into swim bladders, organs filled with air that help fish control their buoyancy. As vertebrates transitioned to land, these simpler lung organs underwent evolutionary refinements. They became more efficient at taking in air, absorbing oxygen, and getting rid of carbon dioxide. Early vertebrate lungs probably started as a single organ, but later evolved into the paired lung structure of two lungs that most modern land vertebrates have. Having two lungs significantly increased the surface area for gas exchange, the process where oxygen enters the blood and carbon dioxide exits. This made breathing air from the atmosphere much more efficient. So lungs were actually a pre-adaptation. They evolved for one purpose, breathing in oxygen-poor water, but turned out to be perfect for another purpose, living on land. You might be wondering, why would animals want to leave the water in the first place? Water seems pretty comfortable. Well, there were both challenges and advantages that drove this move. The challenges were real. Desiccation, drying out, was a major problem, leading to the evolution of protective coverings and ways to retain water. Gravity demanded stronger skeletons, as we talked about, but land also offered some serious advantages. There was abundant sunlight for photosynthesis, important for plants that animals could eat. There was more readily available carbon dioxide in the air for plants. And there were new food sources with less competition and predation compared to crowded aquatic ecosystems. Imagine being a fish in a pond full of predators and competitors. Moving to land, even though it was hard, gave you access to a whole new areas with lots of food and fewer things trying to eat you. These factors acted as potent selective forces. They pushed evolution in the direction of land adaptations because animals that could handle land, even a little bit, had a better chance of surviving and having babies. The transition to land required a whole suite of physiological adaptations, changes in how the body works beyond just bones and lungs. Let me tell you about some of them. First, there's osmoregulation. That's controlling the water and salts in your body. On land, you can dry out, so you need ways to combat desiccation. Animals called amniotes, reptiles, birds, and mammals, evolved efficient kidneys and thirst mechanisms to manage their water. They also developed thicker keratinized skin with lots of tusk protein called keratin that reduced water loss. Second, skeletal and muscular systems had to become much more robust to provide structural support against gravity. Third, circulatory systems had to change. Hearts became more powerful to pump blood against gravity. Mammals and birds evolved higher arterial pressures, the pressure of blood in their arteries, to push blood all the way up to their brains when standing upright. Fourth, sensory organs had to adapt. The tympanic ear evolved in some vertebrates for perceiving sound in air. Sound travels differently in air than in water, so you need different equipment to hear it. Perhaps the biggest challenge was reproduction. In water, many animals reproduce by releasing eggs and sperm into the water where they meet and fertilize. This is called external fertilization. But this doesn't work on land. Sperm cells need moisture to swim to the egg. So terrestrial animals had to develop internal fertilization, where the sperm meets the egg inside the female's body. But even internal fertilization wasn't enough. Regular fish eggs need to be in water or they'll dry out. The solution was the amniotic egg, and this was a total game changer. The amniotic egg was specialized membranes that protect the embryo, the developing baby, facilitate gas exchange, letting oxygen in and carbon dioxide out, retain moisture so the baby doesn't dry out, and store waste until the baby hatches. With the amniotic egg, animals no longer needed to lay their eggs in water. This innovation led to diverse reproductive strategies. Some animals use oviparity, laying eggs, like birds and most reptiles. Others evolved ovoviviparity, keeping eggs inside until they hatch, or viviviparity, giving live birth, like most mammals. Plants face similar challenges and involved pollination, using wind or animals to transport their gametes, reproductive cells, instead of relying on water. Fungi adapted by producing spores that could be dispersed by air or carried by animals. Every major group of land-dwelling organism had to solve this reproduction puzzle. Thanks so much for joining us today at Nog's House. The story of life's great migration from water to land is an amazing treatment to the power of evolution. Driven by environmental pressures and ecological opportunities, lobe-finned fish transformed into the first tetrapods through incredible changes. Fin bones becoming limbs, lungs for breathing air, and reproductive innovations that freed life from dependence on water. Fossils like Tiktaalik, Anchostega, and Ithiostega show us this wasn't a sudden jump, but a gradual step-by-step transition. This great migration led to the evolution of all land animals and fundamentally changed Earth's ecosystems. It set the stage for the incredible diversity of life we see today, including us. Pretty wild to think that our ancestors were fish that crawled out of the water, right? But the story doesn't end here. Next time we're going to talk about the era of dinosaurs, a time when these land-dwelling animals evolved into some of the most incredible creatures that ever lived. I hope you'll come back and visit Nog's house again. See you next time.